millionaire single dad, witnesses Waitress dancing with her disabled daughter, and her life changes forever. The diner was quiet that afternoon, bathed in golden light slanting through the tall windows that lined the front wall. Dust motes danced in the still air as the scent of warm pie and fresh coffee drifted lazily through the room. Outside, the world moved slowly, a dog napping on the sidewalk, wind rustling through the trees, cars passing by every so often, but nothing urgent, nothing loud. Inside, Ellie wiped down a counter that had already been cleaned twice. There were no new orders coming in, no customers needing attention, except for one. She glanced toward the far corner of the diner, near the window booth, and smiled softly. Max was there. 8 years old, wide-eyed and serious. He sat in his wheelchair with a sketch pad on his lap, a crayon in his hand. His father, Logan, had stepped outside to take a call, leaving Max alone with his drawings. He always drew trees, tall ones, bent ones, sometimes with birds and sometimes with just empty branches. Ellie approached quietly, crouching next to him so they were eye level. "Hey, Max," she said gently, tilting her head toward him. "How's the masterpiece coming along today?" Max looked up, giving her the faintest of smiles. "It's a pine tree this time," he said, "like the ones by our driveway." "It's beautiful," Ellie said, nodding with admiration. "You've got a real artist's eye, you know that?" He shrugged modestly, but his smile lingered. Then Ellie's voice softened even more. "How about we try something today? Just one little step." Max blinked. "What do you mean?" She glanced around the empty diner, then back at him with a playful glint in her eye. "Just you and me, one step. We'll see how far we get." Max looked down at his lap, his hands curling slightly. "I haven't stood in a long time." "I know," she said, "but I'll be right here. We'll go slow, like a game. You trust me?" He looked up into her eyes, saw the certainty there, and nodded. Ellie stood and gently moved his sketch pad aside. She positioned herself beside him, reaching out with both hands. "Okay, buddy, ready?" Max took a deep breath, his small hands wrapping around hers. With careful precision, Ellie braced one foot behind her and pulled gently, encouraging Max to lean forward. His arms shook and his legs barely moved, but then, slowly, shakily, he pushed down on the footrests and began to rise. His knees trembled. Ellie steadied him. "You're doing amazing. Just breathe." Max's legs were stiff, reluctant, but he was upright, wobbling but standing, for the first time in almost 2 years. His eyes widened. "I'm up." "Yes, you are," Ellie beamed, holding his hands tightly. "Look at you, Max." He wobbled, then faltered slightly, and Ellie caught him under the arms before he lost balance, but he was still standing. "Want to take a step?" she whispered. Max nodded, jaw tight with concentration. Ellie stepped back just a bit, guiding his right foot forward, inch by inch. His left followed, slow and unsure. 1, she counted softly. 2. They laughed together, shaky and breathless, as Ellie took another step back and Max followed. He was clumsy, but he was moving. "You're dancing with me," Ellie grinned. "Look at you go." Max laughed, a full, unguarded laugh. Ellie twirled on the balls of her feet, spun once in joy, then reached back to him, letting him rest his weight on her again. She took both his hands, and together they danced a few more steps across the empty diner, her whispering encouragement, his giggles rising like music. The door opened. Logan stepped in, mid-sentence on his phone. He froze. His phone dropped to his side. There, in the middle of the diner, his son. His boy, who had not walked in nearly 2 years, was upright, clinging to the hands of a young waitress, moving step by step across the floor. Logan couldn't breathe. His throat tightened, his heart pounded. He stared, unmoving, watching Max shuffle forward with a look of pure joy on his face. Ellie looked up and saw Logan. She paused, letting Max lean into her as she whispered, "Your dad's here." Max turned his head and smiled. "Daddy, look! I'm walking!" Logan stepped forward, slow and wide-eyed, emotion crashing over him in waves. He dropped to one knee, arms open. Max let go of Ellie and took 2 more unsteady steps before collapsing into his father's embrace. Logan held him tight, not caring about the tears spilling down his cheeks. Max buried his face in his father's shoulder, giggling between breaths. Ellie stood nearby, hands over her mouth, eyes shining with pride. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Logan looked up at her, his voice hoarse. How did you do this?" Ellie shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I didn't. He did." Outside, the world went on. Cars passed. The wind blew through the pines. But inside that small diner, something had shifted forever, and no one would ever be the same again. The diner was quieter than usual the next morning. The usual sounds of clinking plates and quiet conversations seemed to hush in the presence of something unspoken. Logan sat alone at the corner booth, a steaming mug of coffee untouched in front of him. His eyes weren't on the menu or the window. They were on Ellie. She moved between tables with her usual grace, but now Logan saw it differently. Not as routine or obligation, but as purpose. There was something behind her smile, something that lingered longer than politeness and deeper than habit. When she finally approached his table, he stood, unsure of why. "Can we talk?" he asked. Ellie nodded, surprised but not wary. "Sure," she said. "You want to go out back?" The alley behind the diner wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet. A single wooden bench sat beneath a rusted tin awning, the smell of bread and lavender wafting faintly from the herb garden Ellie had planted in cracked pots. They sat. Logan broke the silence first. "I need to know, yesterday, what you did for Max." "Why?" Ellie looked down at her hands, fingers knotted in her apron. She took a long breath. "Because someone once believed I could dance again, too." He frowned, confused. "Dance?" She nodded slowly. "I used to be a dancer. Ballet, modern, even a little ballroom. I toured with a small company right out of high school. It was everything to me." Logan listened, caught off guard by the softness in her voice. "I had just landed a solo in a major production, my first spotlight. 2 weeks before opening night, I was in a car accident. Not a big one, but enough to fracture my hip and tear a ligament. Surgery was risky, rehab was long. My insurance, well, let's just say it didn't cover the dreams part of recovery." Her voice didn't break, but her words slowed. "I lost everything. My spot in the company, the scholarship I was supposed to start that fall, the dance studio I used to train at hired someone else, and my parents. They didn't know how to handle a daughter who couldn't do what she was born to do." Logan said nothing. He didn't have to. "I worked odd jobs, tried to pay off the medical bills, ended up here, waiting tables, telling myself it was temporary, but the truth was, I was stuck." Ellie finally turned to him, eyes vulnerable but steady. "When I first saw Max, I recognized that look in his eyes, that quiet sadness, that, I guess this is it for me feeling. I've lived it. I know what it's like to want to move, but feel like the world glued your feet to the floor." Logan stared at her, his throat tight. "You saw yourself in him." "I still do." A pause hung between them, charged with unspoken connection. "I thought you were just enthusiastic," he admitted. "Too kind, maybe." "I didn't see." "I know," Ellie said gently. "Most people don't. Okay, they see the apron and the coffee pot and think that's all there is. But it's not." "No," she said softly. "It's not." The wind stirred the leaves in the pots, rustling lavender and thyme. Ellie looked up at the sky. "There was a time I thought about ending it all, when I could barely afford groceries, and the pain wouldn't go away, and I couldn't dance, and I couldn't breathe without remembering who I used to be." She turned back to him, voice trembling for the first time, but then Max came in. Week after week, and he smiled at me like I mattered. He didn't know my story, but somehow he helped me find a new one. Logan couldn't speak. He just looked at her. The woman who had lifted his son with nothing but faith and patience, and who, in the process, had found something worth holding on to again. "You saved him," he said finally. Ellie shook her head. "No, he saved me." And in that quiet moment, something shifted, not just in Logan's understanding of Ellie, but in the way he saw his own life, the way he held grief like armor, the way he'd kept the world at arm's length. Now a waitress with a limp and a story had cracked open that armor, with nothing more than kindness and the courage to dance again, one step at a time. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft golden light over the tops of the buildings as Logan pulled into the parking lot of the diner. It had become a ritual now, early mornings, quiet booths, Max's sketch pad on the table, and Ellie moving between customers like she was made of sunlight and music. But Logan no longer came just for the routine, or even for the peace. He came for her. Logan Evans was a man most people described as successful, CEO of a booming tech firm, net worth in the millions, a name that commanded attention in any boardroom. But no one ever described him as warm, or joyful, or whole. Not since his wife passed away. It had been 2 years, but the grief never softened, just learned how to hide better. He had buried himself in work, in planning Max's therapies, in controlling everything he could, because what he could not control had taken everything from him. And yet, all his influence, all his money, had done nothing to change what he had convinced himself was permanent. Max would never walk again. Until Ellie. He had dismissed her at first, just a waitress, too cheerful. But then he saw the way Max lit up when she walked in the room. The way his eyes followed her every move, as if watching her made the pain hurt less. And now every time Logan sat across from his son and watched Ellie kneel beside Max's wheelchair, coaxing him to try a stretch, guiding his hands into a new pose, encouraging one more second on his feet, he saw a kind of hope he had long since abandoned. Over the next few weeks, something began to shift. Max laughed more. He asked to come to the diner, even on days when Logan was too tired to argue. He started humming songs Ellie had played on the radio while she worked. And then, one afternoon, Logan walked in and saw something that stopped him cold. Ellie was in the middle of the dining room, her hands raised in the air as Max stood next to her, not holding on to her, not leaning against a chair, just standing. His legs trembled, his face focused, but he was upright, on his own. It lasted only seconds, but Logan couldn't breathe. Ellie turned and caught his eye, her grin wide and filled with tears. Max looked over, proud and radiant. "Dad, did you see?" Logan nodded, swallowing hard. "I did, buddy. I saw everything." Later that evening, after Max had finished dinner and was fast asleep in the back seat, Logan sat alone behind the wheel of his car outside their house. The radio was off. The streetlights buzzed faintly, and Logan stared out the windshield, unable to move. Tears slipped down his face before he even realized they were there. He didn't sob. He didn't break. It was quieter than that, just a man letting go of something he had held too tightly for too long. Grief, guilt, fear, it all spilled silently down his cheeks. For the first time since his wife's funeral, Logan allowed himself to believe in something other than survival. He believed in possibility. He believed in Max. He believed, maybe for the first time, that they might actually be okay. And more than that, he believed that maybe, just maybe, he was allowed to hope again. He looked into the rearview mirror, saw his son curled up peacefully, a faint smile still on his lips. Then he thought of Ellie, her gentle voice, her fierce heart, the way she had seen Max not as broken but as brave, and Logan whispered into the silence, "Thank you." He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years he wanted to find out. It began with a simple question, asked with a spark of boldness and hope. One quiet afternoon, as Max napped in the booth after a particularly long session, Ellie slid into the seat across from Logan and looked him straight in the eyes. "Let me work with him. Every day. After school." Logan blinked. "You already do more than enough." "I want to do more," she said gently. "I want to try something. Consistent. Focused. Not just stretching or standing. I want to help him move." "Really move?" Logan hesitated. His first instinct was to say no. To protect. To control. But then he thought of Max, how his eyes lit up when he walked through the diner door, how he laughed with Ellie, how he stood, and the words caught in his throat. "Okay," he said. "Yes." They turned Logan's backyard into something magical. It started with a few square feet of level ground, swept clean of leaves. Ellie brought in old yoga mats, garden lights, and a speaker that played soft classical music. Logan helped her build a railing out of PVC pipe and wood, low enough for Max to grip. Together, they marked out the dance floor with chalk, each line a goal, a boundary, a step forward. Ellie called them magic paths, and Max adored them. Each afternoon, after school and work, they gathered in the backyard, Max in sneakers instead of his usual brace, Ellie in leggings and a faded tank top with a dancer's silhouette across the chest. Logan often sat on the porch at first, pretending to read the paper, but his eyes never left the two of them. "Okay," Ellie would say, "today we waltz." "Just like a gentleman," Max giggled. "But I can't dance." "You already are," she whispered, gently guiding his foot forward, then to the side. One step, then two. Some days Max struggled to stand. Some days he made it halfway across the yard, and some days he collapsed into Ellie's arms, laughing, never defeated. Logan started joining them, not at first, but eventually Ellie would catch him rolling up his sleeves, dragging a rake across the grass, quietly clearing space so Max would not trip. Then one day, he picked up Max's other hand, and they walked 3 steps together, father, son, and the woman who was no longer just a waitress. There were moments, brief but bright, when Logan and Ellie would lock eyes across the yard, not with flirtation but understanding, a look that said, "We're building something together." One golden evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the backyard in copper and amber, Max sat on the edge of the mat and looked up at his father. "Dad," he said, "do you think Mom can see me now?" Logan froze. Ellie did too. He knelt beside his son and nodded slowly. "I think she sees you every day." "Do you think she's proud?" "I think," Logan whispered, brushing a hand through Max's hair, "she's never been prouder." That night, Ellie stayed a little longer. Max had fallen asleep on the couch after dinner, and Logan walked her to her car. The porch light flickered, casting a warm halo around them. "Thank you," he said quietly, for giving him back a part of his life. Ellie looked at him, her voice soft. "He's giving it back to me, too." They stood in silence for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then she left. Hours later, unable to sleep, Ellie returned. She had forgotten her phone charger on the porch. She parked quietly, not wanting to wake them. But as she stepped toward the porch, she stopped. The yard was dimly lit by moonlight, and there, in the middle of the chalk-lined floor, stood Logan. He was on his knees, his hands clasped in front of him, his head bowed low. She could hear his voice, carried softly through the stillness. "Please," he whispered, "please, just let him dance once in his life. Not for me, not for her, just for him. He deserves that." Ellie stood still, her heart aching. She had seen Logan's strength, his anger, his control, but never this. Never this raw, beautiful, breaking plea. And in that moment she understood everything. The man, the father, the grief, the hope. She stepped back, silent, letting the prayer hang in the air undisturbed, because it was sacred. And maybe, just maybe, it was already being answered. The ballroom was alive with laughter, champagne flutes clinking, and soft jazz floating through the air. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the crowd of donors, executives, and philanthropists, all gathered under the banner of Logan's new initiative, a foundation for children with mobility challenges. The event was grand, the kind of gala people whispered about for weeks beforehand, and everything had to be perfect. Ellie stood in the wings, behind a velvet curtain, holding Max's small hand. He wore a white button-down shirt, tucked into black pants, his shoes polished and tied tight. She knelt in front of him, straightening his collar with a gentle touch. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked, her voice a whisper beneath the music. Max nodded, his eyes wide but calm. "I practiced every day." Ellie smiled. heart pounding. "You remember the steps? 1, 2, hold, pivot," he recited. "That's my guy," she whispered. She squeezed his hand and kissed the top of his head. "Let's show them." On the far side of the ballroom, Logan was mid-conversation with a major donor when he glanced toward the stage and saw the movement behind the curtain. His brow furrowed. The performance wasn't scheduled yet, just a brief musical interlude, nothing more. Then, the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room as the MC stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "before we continue, we'd like to share a small but very special surprise." The piano began, soft, delicate notes flowing like water. Logan turned toward the stage just as the curtain opened, and Max stepped out. Logan froze. His son was walking. No braces, no wheelchair. His steps, slow, careful, measured. The crowd held its breath, watching as Ellie followed behind him, one step at a time, her hands poised gently at her sides, ready if he stumbled. Logan took a step forward. Panic flickered in his eyes. His voice caught in his throat. "Ellie, what are you doing?" But then Max turned his head, his eyes finding his father's in the crowd. He smiled. "I want to try," he said loudly, clearly over the quiet music, "for you and for her." Logan's heart clenched. The music swelled. Max took another step and another. 6 in total, slow, deliberate, but upright. When he reached the center of the stage, Ellie joined him, taking his small hand in hers. And then, softly, they turned. One pivot, one full circle, a dance. Not flawless, not smooth, but real, joyful, alive. The audience gasped, then erupted into applause, cheers, tears. People stood, phones rose to capture the moment. But Logan didn't move. He just watched, his hand pressed over his heart, his eyes burning with emotion. Max was laughing now, eyes shining under the stage lights. Ellie twirled beside him, then knelt beside him, letting him lean on her as they both took a bow. The applause thundered. Logan took a slow step forward, then another. When they reached the edge of the stage, Max reached for him. Logan scooped him into his arms without hesitation, holding him close, too choked up to speak. "You did it," he whispered against his son's hair. "You really did it." Max grinned. "We did it, me and Miss Ellie." Logan looked at Ellie then. She stood nearby, wiping a tear from her cheek, her smile soft but radiant. He mouthed the words, "Thank you." She didn't respond with words. She just nodded, because some moments didn't need anything else. That night, under the shimmering lights of the ballroom, something more than a performance had taken place. A boy had danced. A father had believed. And a woman who had once lost everything had just helped create something unforgettable. Not for attention, not for applause, but for love. And the music, gentle, eternal, played on in their hearts. The days that followed the gala glowed with a quiet, lingering magic. Logan and Ellie began spending more time together, no longer under the structure of therapy sessions or quiet diner chats, but on long evening walks, shared dinners at Logan's home, and laughter that came easily, naturally. Max was the happiest of all. "I finally have someone else to tell my bedtime stories to," he declared one night, proudly pulling Ellie by the hand into his room with a stack of books under his arm. Ellie laughed, letting him climb into bed while Logan leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching them like someone trying to memorize a moment. "She's better than me at the voices," he admitted, as Ellie brought to life a dragon with a perfect growl that made Max squeal with delight. As the weeks passed, they fell into rhythm. Not perfect, not scripted, but real. Then one morning, a letter arrived for Ellie. She opened it at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling slightly. Max and Logan looked on, curious. When she read the words aloud, her voice cracked. She had been accepted into a year-long certification program to become a licensed dance therapist, specializing in children with mobility impairments. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, housing, materials. She looked up, stunned. "It's in Chicago." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Logan stood, walked over, and pulled her into a hug. "You have to go," he said without hesitation. "This is what you were born to do." Tears filled her eyes. "But what about Max? What about us?" Logan smiled, cupping her face gently. "We're not going anywhere. You don't need to choose between your dream and us." And just like that, the fear that had been coiled in her chest since the envelope arrived began to unspool. That night, as they lay under a blanket of stars in Logan's backyard, Max asleep inside and the world hushed around them, Ellie turned to Logan. "Are you ever scared?" she asked. "That I'll leave too? That this might not last?" He was silent for a beat, the moonlight catching the edge of his jaw. Then he looked at her. "I'd rather love and lose you," he said quietly, "than never try." Her breath caught, because that was the thing with Logan. He never said too much, but when he spoke from his heart, it landed with the weight of 1,000 silent promises, and in that moment, Ellie knew he was all in. 2 days later, something happened that no one saw coming. They were in the yard again, Ellie marking out new chalk paths, Logan setting up the speaker, Max bouncing in excitement at their daily routine. But this time, as Ellie turned to start the music, Max suddenly stood, unprompted, unaided. "Wait," he said, his eyes wide with a kind of internal fire. "Let me try." Ellie and Logan froze. Max took a breath. Then, with no hands to guide him, no rail to hold, he stepped forward. 1 step, then another, and another. 3 full, solid steps, then 2 more. He stumbled on the 6th, falling into Logan's arms, but he was laughing, breathless, victorious. Ellie clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes filling. Logan held his son close, tears streaming freely down his cheeks. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." Max looked at Ellie, still in shock, and said through a grin, "I wanted to surprise you." She dropped to her knees beside him and hugged him tight. "Best surprise I've ever had." That moment sealed something. Not just Max's strength, not just Logan's love, but the fact that whatever happened next, Chicago, challenges, change, they were no longer just helping each other heal. They were a family, and nothing could take that away. The dance studio smelled of fresh paint and lavender-scented floor polish. Sunlight poured in through tall windows, spilling over the wooden floors like a golden river. Ribbons hung from the mirrors. Soft music played from an old speaker in the corner, and laughter echoed from every corner of the room. Ellie stood in the center of it all, barefoot, in soft leggings and a white blouse, her hair tied back, her eyes shining with pride. Around her, children moved in clumsy, joyful rhythm. Some walked with braces, others used walkers. Some twirled with arms outstretched, while others swayed in place. It did not matter. Here, every child was a dancer, and Max was right beside her. At 10 years old, he had become her unofficial assistant, whispering encouragement to a shy new student, demonstrating the warm-up stretches, even helping pick the music for their weekly freestyle circle. He wore a whistle around his neck like a coach, but used it only to make the others giggle. "I'm not a real teacher," he often said. "You're the best kind of teacher," Ellie always replied. "You know what it means to try." After each class, parents gathered at the windows, tears in their eyes as they watched their children move in ways doctors had once said were impossible. Ellie's classes were free, paid for entirely by Logan's foundation, now expanded and thriving. But she never spoke of money. Only movement, only music, only hope. The wedding was 2 weeks away. Ellie and Logan planned it together in the simplest way possible. A garden ceremony behind the studio, with fairy lights, wildflowers, and a dance floor under the stars. No caterers, no tuxedos, just love, laughter, and a shared belief in new beginnings. Max was more excited than anyone. He had taken his role seriously, drawing invitation cards by hand, picking out songs for the playlist, and writing a speech which he guarded like state secrets. Only Ellie knew he was nervous about reading it aloud. "You'll be great," she told him one night as he practiced whispering to the mirror. "You're already the heart of this family." The night before the wedding, Ellie sat alone in the studio, gazing at a white garment bag hanging from the wall. She unzipped it slowly, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was the ballet costume she had never worn, white chiffon, delicate tulle, stitched lace along the neckline. She had kept it all these years, folded away like a piece of another life. But now it no longer represented something lost. It had become something transformed. On the day of the wedding, she wore it, not as a dancer performing for applause, but as a woman stepping into a life she had helped choreograph with grace, pain, and purpose. The garden was glowing with soft light. Chairs lined the aisle. Friends, family, and students from the studio gathered with smiles and tissues. Max stood at the front, holding the ring box with solemn pride. Logan watched as Ellie walked down the aisle, her dress catching the light like it had been meant for this moment all along. His eyes never left her. The ceremony was short, heartfelt. They exchanged vows with laughter and tears. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause, and Max was the first to run up and hug them both. Then came the moment Max had been preparing for. He stepped onto the small platform, cleared his throat, and held up a folded paper. "I was going to say something funny," he began, his voice cracking slightly, "but I think this is better." He glanced at Ellie, then Logan, then down at his paper. "I used to think I'd never dance. I used to think dreams were only for other kids. But then she came along, and she didn't just show me how to move, she showed me how to smile again." He turned to Logan. "And he didn't just protect me, he believed in me, even when I didn't. He believed in both of us." Max took a breath. "So I just want to say thank you." He looked at the crowd, then back at his parents. "She taught me to dance, and he taught me to believe." Silence hung for a second. Then a wave of applause, cheers, and tears followed. Ellie wiped her eyes. Logan reached over and pulled Max into a tight hug. That night under the stars, Ellie and Logan danced together for the first time, as husband and wife, and Max joined them, spinning gently in his own rhythm, surrounded by friends and family, on the same floor where he had once taken his first trembling steps. It was not a recital, it was not a performance. It was their life, and it was beautiful. The field was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, the kind that makes everything look softer, kinder, as if the earth itself paused to witness something sacred. Wildflowers swayed in the breeze, and the tall grass shimmered under the setting sun. A wooden arch, hand-built and wrapped in simple linen and vines, stood at the center of it all. Guests sat in rows of white chairs nestled into the earth, their faces glowing with emotion and anticipation. There was no grand orchestra, no red carpet, just birdsong, the hush of wind, and the faint melody of a single acoustic guitar strumming softly from the edge of the clearing. Ellie stood at the edge of the aisle, her white ballet dress fluttering with each step she took across the grass. She was barefoot, her hair loosely curled, a crown of baby's breath woven through the strands. As she walked forward, her eyes never left Logan, who stood beneath the arch in a gray vest and rolled sleeves, his heart in his eyes. Max stood beside him, a tiny matching boutonniere pinned to his jacket, his hands clasped in front of him. When he saw Ellie coming, his grin broke wide across his face. As Ellie reached the arch, Logan took her hands. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, drinking in everything it had taken to get there. Every fall, every step, every note of music that had led them to this quiet, sun-drenched place. The officiant's words were simple, woven with humor and warmth, but it was the vows that held the field still. "I used to think my story ended on a stage," Ellie said, voice trembling. "But it turns out that was only the first act. You gave me a second chance, not just at love, but at joy, at purpose, at family." Logan's voice was low and steady. "You walked into our lives and made music where there had been silence. You didn't just teach Max to dance, you taught me to feel again. I vow to stand beside you, always, whether we're soaring or stumbling." There were tears, of course. There were soft gasps and held hands in the crowd. Then, as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, The crowd erupted in applause. But before Ellie and Logan could kiss, Max stepped forward, holding out a hand to Ellie. "May I have this dance?" he asked. Ellie knelt slightly, her smile glowing. "You may." The guitarist played a slow, sweet melody. Max held Ellie's hand with care, his other hand resting lightly in hers, and together they swayed under the arch, in front of the guests, in front of the world. Then Logan joined them, one hand on Ellie's back, the other clasping Max's shoulder. The three of them danced in a slow, perfect triangle. There was no choreography, no performance, just movement, connection, love. The crowd watched in silence, tears flowing freely, smiles never leaving their faces. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden rays across the field, the family moved beyond the arch and into the open grass. Ellie twirled gently, Max stepped confidently, and Logan followed with an ease that only came from being fully, completely present. They danced until the sky turned amber, until the stars began to blink to life, until all that remained was the memory of movement, of music, of a moment no one would forget. Ellie looked up at Logan. Max nestled between them and whispered, "We did it," and Logan smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Together. In the last frame of the evening, as the sky turned lavender and the field grew quiet, three figures danced beneath the open sky, hand in hand, heart to heart. Not a recital, not a dream, a life. One dance, one love, one forever. As the final notes of their dance faded into the twilight, we're reminded that healing does not always come with loud triumphs, but often with quiet moments, gentle hands, and the courage to take one more step. Ellie, Logan, and Max showed us that family isn't just something we're born into. Sometimes it's something we build, step by step, breath by breath, and beat by beat. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the power of second chances and the beauty of believing in someone, please consider subscribing to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here we bring you tales that uplift, inspire, and remind us all of the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes all it takes is one dance to change a life.